All right, since it is noon, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. It's Developing Issues in Agriculture and Economic Issues Related to Big Data in Agriculture. And today we have Dr. Terry Griffin with us. He is the Cropping Systems Economist at Kansas State University in the Department of Agricultural Economics. His research program focuses on precision agriculture and farmers' use of agricultural data. Today, he addresses the implications of big data in agriculture and lays the framework for the remainder of this webinar series. We would like to thank our sponsors real quick. They're there at the bottom of the slide, and we thank them all for participating in today's webinar. If you have any questions today during the webinar, please enter them into the chat box. And without further ado, I will go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Terry Griffin.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Paul Geringer, and also Shannon Farrell from Oklahoma State University and Tiffany Dow from Texas A&M. We're gonna have a series of these, and this will be the first one. And I'm hoping to lay out a few issues that will get you thinking about big data in agriculture and how the legal perspectives that are forthcoming in the future webinars will. My mom that I would wish her happy birthday today if she logs in. I'm not sure if she did or not, but if she did, happy birthday, Mom. I love you. And a few other things I want to point out. Paul Geringer made a plan to follow me not only today but into the future. I'll post things about farm management, precision ag, big data, and ag data. Also, for the certified crop advisors in the audience, there will be continuing education credit, and we'll show a QR code at the end. So have your cell phones ready to scan the QR code, or otherwise post your number and so forth, and we'll make sure you get credit for that. So a little background on precision ag before we really get into what precision ag data has evolved into, which we're referring to as big data. I want to give a few statistics about how people, in particular service providers, are using precision ag technology. This comes from a survey done from Purdue University, sponsored by CropLife magazine by Bruce Erickson and David Widmar. The survey results are online, and here's a bit.ly link to that, and you're more than welcome to go to the Purdue website and look at it in detail. But I'll give a few highlights. One highlight is, as of this year, or last year, 2015, 20% of service providers, cooperatives, ag retail, input suppliers, not necessarily farmers, 20% of service providers are using telematics last year. This is up from 15% 2 years ago. One question that we'll sort of address at the end of this presentation is why are more service providers not using this technology? Why is it not 70 or 80% of them? And we'll discuss that a little bit more, but I want you to start thinking about that before we hit that head on. And if you're not really familiar with agriculture, in particular precision ag, I want to throw this statistic out. Most 70% of soil grid sizes in the United States are at 2.5 acres. Not a big surprise if you're in precision ag, but I just want to point out that that is almost a standard size, and it does vary by location. And some places a certain percent is smaller than 2.5 acres, or even bigger than that as well. I will not speak too much about drones or UAS or UAVs, but I want to throw out the statistic that Erickson and Widmar present. 16% of the service providers are using UAVs to work with farmers. This does not include the third-party UAV companies that are dedicated to these services, but this is the input suppliers and co-ops and so forth again. This would be a really good dedicated webinar just on the legal aspects of UAVs in the future. The same survey provided some insights into this question, and this is sort of what's going to set the stage for where we're going to go today, and as well as the rest of this webinar series. Erickson Widmar asked the question, how do you, as a service provider, use ag data? And the responses were, interesting. So the top one, 80%, 82%, says we print yield maps, we print soil maps and so forth for our customers. And as an ag economist, you probably guess I put in very little value in printed yield maps, but as a farm management person, I will throw out or work some emotional tie to the land. May appreciate printed maps of different aspects of the field, framed and given as gifts that may help some landlord-tenant relations. So it may have some value. I want to throw that out. I'll bring your attention to the bottom. 9% said we do not use ag data or farm level data in our business. Okay, that's fair enough. That kind of brings us to the middle three responses. Put a little circle around those. Roughly 40% says, we don't aggregate data together into a community, but we will analyze it at the individual farm level and provide recommendations back to our customers. 20% said, well, we'll aggregate the data into, let's call it a community. We'll aggregate data into a community for push back to, it's kind of provide recommendations back accordingly. And usually when I'm talking to farmer groups, one of the questions I would ask in a live audience is, where do your service providers fall on this list? And again, this is the Purdue Crop Life Survey from Erickson and Widmar.
Terry, sorry to interrupt, but
Ashley,
it seems that your sound is going in and out. Yeah, I was just about to say you were cutting out a little bit.
Okay. I will try to speak slower, maybe.
Okay, I'll let you know if it cuts out again. I can hear you fine now.
Okay, and if it does, can I call in on the telephone? Okay. This Wordle we borrowed from a conference that we did in Canberra, Australia back in June. It was a soil big data conference. And this kind of sets the definition of big data. People ask, what is big data? And everybody has their own definition, which is fine. But a few things I want to point out using this Wordle is that, volume is a good descriptor. Volume meaning big, a lot of data. Historically, I would download data to my computer to analyze it. When data are truly big, that may not be feasible. We may have to move the analytics to the data. Another term is velocity, speed. Think of it this way. If we're beginning harvest season and we have a big data industry in agriculture, think about how much bigger the data set gets every day during harvest when there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of acres being harvested in any given week. How much bigger that data set gets. It's sort of like drinking through a fire hose. It's high velocity. I just want to point out a few of those terms as we move forward in the presentation. Is the sound going better now for everybody?
It sounds good on my end, Terry. I think it's good so far. I'll let you know if it happens again.
I'm leaning in towards my computer. So 4 years ago, one of the headlines that kind of sent ripples throughout our industry was when Monsanto bought a planting hardware company that had some software. This is one of the major events in precision ag that kind of got us thinking about big data in agriculture. And 18 months later, another headline came about when they purchased Climate. Two things to point out is the relative size and the value. Climate was purchased for about 4 times as much as what Precision Planting was, but more importantly to me, I think, is the media who is covering this transaction. It seems that this example is TechCrunch.com, and maybe for one of the first times in the history of agriculture, the technology industry was really focusing in on what was happening in the ag sector. And due to these events, we had other partnerships between hardware companies, seed companies, CPC, crop protection chemical companies. And initially, we had about any given week of the year, there was announcements being made. And as time went on, we got more and more elaborate and advanced partnerships between different types of companies. And I just want to throw these out as an example. Again, you can go to Google and set up an alert and get several headlines like this, but these were two that were caught my attention. But then in November, the initial headline I shared from 4 years ago was almost subject. And again, this is going to send ripples throughout our industry. And the reason I bring this up is I encourage you, when you're working with your clientele, the farmers, to consider how this is going to play out in our industry. And I'm not sure how it's going to, but it will have ripples being caused for several more years. So due to those headlines and other things that have happened in our industry in the last 5 years, people are becoming more sensitive about privacy and security. Although this is not a new idea, in the 1990s, when GPS was commercialized for agriculture, fields were being able to be identified by location for the first time. And there were actually meetings about data privacy. One was held in 1998 in Nebraska. And it kind of quietly went away until about 5 years ago. We got a lot more interest in this. And talking with farmers and the service providers, 3 areas of security and privacy are on their minds. And the first one is preventing others from accessing my data. And that seems to be a pretty common one we hear about. The second one is preventing data from becoming corrupted, either intentional or unintentional methods. The loss of data. And you can, several years ago, we would lose data by moving flash media from a combine to the computer. We'd physically lose and of these 3, when I do a quick poll during live workshops, most of the time the general consensus is the third one is the most important to farmers today, preventing the loss of their data, meaning that they're more concerned about losing access to their own data rather than someone else gaining their data becoming corrupted. So I thought that was an interesting outcome from a straw poll that we do. I won't say a whole lot about the types of data other than I wanted to set this up for Ashley Ellickson and Shannon Farrell to talk about the next webinar. But there's different types of data that collect for the farmer. You can think of service providers collecting soil samples. And the third one is data others collect on the farmer. And I won't steal his thunder, but Shannon likes to talk about credit scores, and this number, everybody has a credit score, and you have a credit score, but you did not generate that score. Someone else did about you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your data or your information. But I just want you to think about that, and Shannon will dive into what that means here in a few weeks. So going back to data versus privacy, one of the really neat things that Google does for us, other than the obvious of providing us with really good insights on what websites we can look at for different topics, they collect data on our search terms. And one of the things that they do for us is allow users to search for how often those terms were searched for, if that makes sense. So the website is google.com/trends. You can throw in a search term like data security here in blue, or data privacy, which shows up here in red. I have my grad students use this tool just to get an idea of how often people in general in society search for different terms. It could be, I encourage you to go to this website and look up UAVs, drones, other aspects. Well, this graph shows us that people in general are more concerned about data security than data privacy. Okay, that's fair enough. I'm going to compare this to something that happened in recent events, but it makes a really good point. Back in July and August of 2015, you may have heard of a company that had data security breach called Ashley Madison. They made a really good example for my point I'm trying to make. If you look at the relative searches for security and privacy and Ashley Madison, when the company got hacked, people started searching for it a lot. And there's a few things we can learn from this. One, if there's value to the data, it's most likely going to be hacked. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Target gets hacked, Home Depot, universities, so forth. And the value can be in financial gain. Can it be stolen and sold? Could it be a foreign national government who's trying to play havoc with another country's economy? Could it be hackers who do this for sport? Hackers are really good at what they do and like to brag to their friends about being able to hack into others' systems. It could be an inside job, which may have disgruntled employee, and which was probably in this case. But I use this example rather than Target or Home Depot or others, because one of the features that Ashley Madison had after they were leaked, after the hack occurred, was when someone, well, let me back up. If you're not familiar with Ashley Madison, it's a dating website aimed at married people. And they had a feature that if you decided that idea to have joined them, for a fee, you could have your information removed from the system. The interesting part of it, the data set was released on the web. You could see who
Terry, you're cutting out again.
paid the fee to have their information removed. To delete data and so forth, but I just want to make that point that most databases are designed to collect, not delete data. So a big thing as an economist I wanted to get across today is how we think about ag data. And one of the big things I think is really important is that we as people treat, and that's just the way that we're hardwired, or at least we're accustomed to thinking of things as being intangible, being real. We know what it means to deal with or own or cars and pencils. But when we're talking about data, it's very different, and we need to consider data for what it is. It is intangible, and it's irreplaceable. Irreplaceable means it's like family heirlooms. If family pictures are destroyed in a tornado, then they're lost. You're not going to get them back. And ag data is the same way. If there's not sufficient backups, then a data loss would mean that we're not going to get the data back. Economists also refer to data as being non-rival. What does non-rival mean? Well, this is what I describe it. Think of your favorite movie, and usually when I'm in the audience, I'll ask for people's favorite movies and make a big deal that there's only 2 or 3 acceptable answers. One of them being Star Wars. So when you saw Star Wars, and if you haven't, do so tonight immediately. When you saw Star Wars, and I saw it later, did I diminish the value that you received from watching the movie when I did? Or you can think of it as a book. When someone else read the book that you read, did it diminish the value that you received? An agricultural example could be weather information, religiously. And they can all consume the same weather information without diminishing the value to any one person. Ag data is the same way. I'm going to argue that multiple people can consume the same ag data without diminishing the value to any other consumer. But a big question you may be asking, someone made a comment, True Grit. Yeah, I agree, it's a good movie also. But the big question here is can we exclude others from using this information that we generate? Well, yes, you can, but only until it's shared. What I mean by that? Well, the kind of the joke I use in a live group is asking about, do you have music on your smartphones? And nearly everybody does. And then I ask the question, was that music obtained legally? And some people are hesitant to answer. Others they know how to shake their head yes. But the point there is, it doesn't matter whether the music was obtained legally or illegally. Digital copies can be considered to be original, can be identical to the original. And ag data is the same way. So if a service provider has parts of the data, let's say soil test data, and another party has application data, landowners may request certain data layers. So when copies exist, excludability of that data no longer holds like it would for a tangible object. And I want to point this out, that this will have implications for what it means to own data. We think about who owns ag data. Well, who should own ag data? Well, from an economic perspective, once the data has been shared, ownership of it does not take on the same meaning as ownership of grain or land or a pencil. And in the next webinar, Shannon Farrell and Ashley Ellickson will dive in deeper on that topic from a legal perspective. One of the characteristics about data too is that mere possession of the data does not imply any value. The value is in its use. And one of the ways I kind of have a play on words is, data has no value. I usually say this when journalists call and just try to get a good headline. It's a tongue-in-cheek answer because technically data has no value. It's only when that data is being used for, let's say, farm management decision-making that it becomes information that does have value. But the underlying point is, if data resides in a data tomb, maybe a hard drive from the 1990s, and it's lying unused, it has no value. It's only when it's used that it does have value, which leads us into the idea that in many cases, farm data will not be used unless it's been used by a third party or maybe in a system that we would consider a big data system. Then it would start having value to the original, let's say, owner of that data. And one other characteristic I want everyone to consider, especially when you're working with your clients, the farmer, is that anonymity does not exist when data are truly big, whether it's in agriculture or any other industry. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just the way it is. It's been shown time and time again with examples of, you know, people's addresses and so forth. You can think of it this way. If you have a big data set and it's truly big, lots of information, and you want to share it with me and you sanitize it, you remove names and anything that can identify individuals. Well, in the big data world, it only take a few more data layers, probably from publicly available sources, to combine back with that original data set, and it's called recombination, in order for individuals to be identified. So the point is, it's when we worry about being anonymous, that's, you know, we don't live in that world anymore. So in the big data world, we think about community. We're living in the community, and everybody has a part of that community. And let's think about this gentleman here. In a live audience, I always use a pop quiz. Who is this guy? Well, you may have guessed that this is Alexander Graham Bell, and he was credited with inventing the telephone. And I always challenge people to think about, make it easier imagination a little bit. If this is the first instance, who is he talking to? Well, okay, nobody. It's only telephone. And then I ask, well, what's the value of this one telephone when it's the only one in existence? Granted, it's probably the greatest invention of all time, but when there was only one of them, it had no value. It was only when the second telephone came online on the network that the first telephone had value. And really, you know, it wasn't the first 10 or 20 telephones that made this invention valuable. It was when we had enough telephones on the network that required us to have a telephone book with telephone numbers in it, that the first one actually had any value. So the point is, the first telephone depends on how many other telephones are on that network. In a popular culture example today could be Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. And ag data is the same way. Look, as an example, the first, you know, couple dozen members were, you know, they may have found some uses for it, but the value didn't really kick in until there were hundreds of thousands of members, and it was your friends and neighbors and family. And there was enough people on Facebook that it encouraged you to freely join the system. That means there was a critical mass of users, and the users were people you wanted to be in a network with. But that network can get so big that it reaches a saturation point. And that saturation point may be when maybe not too many people, but maybe someone that, you know, likes to post pictures of you when you were a baby in a bathtub and those types of things, brings down the joy from it. Ag data is the same way, and a lot of groups are asking questions like, we have this really good data system, we have these really good tools, why aren't farmers standing in line paying us to give us their data? And a lot of times the answer is as simple as because there's not enough farmers or acres in your system yet. When you do have enough farmers and enough acres in your system, people will readily, freely join your system. So a lot of times it's not necessarily the quality of the services provided, but the number of users on that system. I will throw out that it is possible to reach a saturation point with ag data, but it's probably not the number of acres so much as it is the quality of that data from those acres. When farmers who are not calibrating yield monitors, or farms who are not tagging their fields with the proper cultivars are joining the system, it is possible to bring down the value. But We're still a long ways from that occurring. One of the characteristics of community data that I really want you to consider is the value of the primary and secondary uses of that data. What I mean by this is the classic example from big data industry is Amazon.com. Amazon collects information on all of us when we shop for different things, and the terminology is data exhaust. When we're shopping online, we leave exhaust in our path of the number of clicks, how long we stared at different web pages, the products we're looking at. Well, Amazon can use that information to help sell us that thing we're shopping for. Maybe it's a toy. And that's the primary use of that data exhaust. Well, Amazon has sort of mastered the use of reusing data, the secondary uses of data, by combining our data exhaust with other people's data exhaust, and they analyze this as a community, and the next time we visit Amazon.com, what do? Well, they tell us things that they think we want to buy, and I can tell you that I listen to the recommendations and sometimes buy what they say I want. To Amazon.com, the value of that secondary use of data has a higher value to them than the primary use of that data. And in agriculture, I would argue it's the same way, and this is the example I would use. So I have three columns. The first column, we have 3 rows of data, 3 rows of examples. We could come up with hundreds, but let's just look at the first one. Yield monitors. Well, why do we have them? Well, to document yields, or maybe an advanced use would be on-farm experiments. And these are the primary uses of yield monitors, and this requires one field. What about the secondary uses of yield data when it's combined with other farmers' data? Well, if we have enough acres, there can be advanced analyses, and agronomists like to talk about the G by E by M. And most people are familiar with the G by E, which is by environment interaction, also known as phenotype. You can think of a product, not just as epigenetics, it could be almost any product in a given environment, weathers, soils, and so forth. But when ag data are truly big, then the M comes into play. What's M? Well, that's the farmer. That stands for management. So it can be how the farmer treats that product in their environment. And now the farmer becomes a variable, since we have lots and lots of observations, that product. But the thing is, it requires many, many fields. One field's not enough. 10 fields aren't enough. 100 fields are not enough. This is going to require tens of thousands of acres. But this is where the industry is headed, and there's going to be some really good, real opportunity for this. And the point here is when ag data are truly big, when the big data industry in agriculture is mature, the secondary uses of ag data will have a higher value than the primary use of that ag data. So I mentioned we bought toys. I bought a football, and I use the example, an elementary school child may take a toy to school, a football, but bring it back home and saying, hey, my friends didn't want to play by my rules, so I'm going to bring it home, and ain't nobody going to play football. And I use that example because I've heard farmers say similar things about, ain't nobody going to make use of my data. And essentially what they're saying is they would rather not take part in big data systems for fear that others may disproportionately benefit from their neighboring competing farmer or someone on the retail side or corporate side. And it kind of got me thinking about a few things. So I enlisted the help of one of my colleagues here at Kansas State, Alex Shamian. And so we've been asking questions about why do people share some data and other farmers may not share any. And we're going on this path of realizing that, everybody, for the most part, are reluctant to share personable information unless the benefits of that outweigh the cost. And I use the example of Google Maps on my phone, which I use a lot. It is clear we give up some privacy. Uh, Google and maybe others know where we are, who we're with, how fast we're driving, where we're going, and so forth. But we freely do this, give up some privacy in order to enjoy the benefits of turn-by-turn directions, information about traffic delays, and so forth. Well, in agriculture, let's think of data as being a resource. It's an intangible resource, and some of the benefits and costs associated with it could be real, they may be perceived, but regardless, data is a source of competitive advantage. And we've all interacted with farmers who are reluctant to tell a group of people how many acres they control. And okay, that's personable information, but what do they lose by accurately reporting that? Well, it got me thinking about that. And with ag data, when we relinquish control of our competitive resource, we give up some bargaining power, maybe with the landowner, maybe with the local retailer, but there is some perception of giving up local bargaining power. In some cases, this may be real. In some cases, it may be perceived. Another thing that had occurred to us, and I have a student who's working on this, and she is looking at the best management practices of soil sampling and data. And some farms are fearful that data may be used against them, whether it may be environmental issues, it could be even in competition for farmland. But there is a fear that data may be used against them if they do collect it and share it. One of the hot topics in big data today in agriculture is how much is data worth? How do we value data at the farm level or at the aggregated level? It's a really difficult question to answer, but this is the path that I kind of walk down with people who are trying to calculate or estimate the value for this ag data. I use the example of a data pirate, okay? And in this case, the data pirate takes data from the farm such that the farm no longer has access to their own data. And the exercise goes something like this. The data pirate will call the farmer and say, I've got you, leaves the answer kind of open-ended. And for the most part, the answer is generally very, very low, close to zero. And I wasn't even using that data, so yeah, you just go ahead and keep it. But then we got on another path with the data pirate. The pirate would ask, well, what if I don't give it back to you, but I also do not give it to, you can go down the list, landowner, neighboring farmer, government, Terry Griffin, the list goes on. And the answer will differ with each of those categories. And this exercise has also been very good for us to figure out how much farmers are willing to pay for added data security, meaning how can we prevent data from being lost at the planter, the combine, the office computer, the cloud? And the answer is usually a lot less than a farm had invested in the collection of the data to begin with. Throw out one more thing about the valuation of data. At one point, I was, I guess, naive enough to think the free market would help us determine the value of data, but it looks like the court systems will likely decide the value of data for us. There are some interesting things that are happening with litigation right now that I think will kind of speeds along this process. So I've written a few things that seem to be a little futuristic on how ag data will impact farmland values and rents. That may not be as futuristic as we initially thought, but one idea was not necessarily the value of farmland as a function of big data, but the value of farmland and farmland rental rates as a function of internet connectivity. Uh, a lot of farms, specific fields, do not have adequate access to wireless internet connectivity to move data. Remember at the beginning of the presentation, I stated that 20% of service providers are using telematics to move data between field equipment and the cloud. Well, this is going back to that question and kind of addressing that. And you can think of it this way. If you have a large farm, farms large enough that they have employees operating farm equipment, and they're using telematics to move data back and forth, but one of the characteristics of telematics is that the farm can monitor in the field. Well, if a farm comes up for rent that does not have adequate wireless connectivity, it's in a part of the county where your cell phones don't work, then a farmer be willing to pay as much for rent for it as a comparable field where they know they can continue to monitor their employees and move data back and forth. Well, the answer is, maybe. I've had some people tell me that this is not going to happen anytime soon, but I've also had people who say, yes, we consider these things when we're bidding on farmland. So if you look at the FCC definition of broadband speed in the United States in January 2015. Before January 2015, the upload and download speeds were much slower. Today, there are 25 megabits per second download speed and 3 megabit per second upload speed. The point here is download speeds are usually much faster than upload speeds, the way they're defined. And that makes sense if you're in an urban residential area. So think about, what do people do at home on the internet? Well, they watch True Grit, they watch Star Wars, they're using Netflix, which requires a lot of download speed. And this is changing some if you think about what happens when people are out to dinner with their friends. What do you see people doing? They take pictures of their food and they post it to Twitter, and Facebook, take selfies. All those things require upload speed. So the difference between upload and download speed seem to be naturally converging. But to give you an idea, on my cell phone, when I'm traveling around the country, I've noticed it's about 3 times the difference. So my upload speed is 3 times, or a third the speed of my download. My download is. Look at this list. This is kind of interesting. This is a compilation from Michael Mushimo from University of Tennessee, Scott Shear from The Ohio State University, and they reported the file size per acre that different imagery and field operations take up. Now, the thing I want you to look at is a bolded numbers on the right-hand side. So, for instance, this 3 megabytes per acre for this set of imagery. As another example, there's 0.3 megabytes for spraying and so forth. Look down that list. One of these is very much different than the other, and for 2 different reasons. And it's prescription files. One, it's a whole lot smaller, but also it's inherently different. It's the only one on this list that we generate in the office computer, and this list is generated in the field for later upload, or some cases real-time upload to the cloud. And so in agriculture, we're trying to upload a lot of data, and we're downloading very little data, and when we do, it's very small files. So we're playing against the natural industry ratio of upload and download speeds. Another issue with that is how active are the wireless connectivity in rural areas. So this map, this is from the National Broadband Map, which is from the government broadbandmap.gov, in this case /speed. The blue areas indicate if you had every wireless carrier, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, list goes on. If you had all of the above, you should get a map that looks something like this. And this is for wireless download. If you go to the website, you can play with wired, upload, and so forth, but let's concentrate on wireless download. Now, this is the old definition of broadband. If you look at the news of 2018, this is the area that would be considered broadband wireless download speeds in the United States. If you superimpose this over the production areas, then you, wouldn't have a lot of wireless download broadband speeds where row crops are being produced. As a challenge to you, there are some apps that you can get on your phone. This is one I use, and the numbers here are for Manhattan, Kansas, and you can attest in the ping rate for wherever you are. And I challenge the farms I work with to do this and get download speeds. Unfortunately, all the farms I deal with, there's not a good enough internet connection to actually test when we're in these rural areas. I won't say a lot about ag data quality, but I do want to make a few points about this. One is that calibration of sensors, in particular yield monitors, are crucial to quality of data. And whether data is being cleaned at the farm level, at the aggregator level, or somewhere in between, it is important to use a consistent technique to remove and make it very important. And one other thing I want to bring out about data, yield data, is that, imagine we have a 3-year plan to participate in a big data system, and there's a gap in the data. One of the years has a big hole in the middle of the field from, let's say, the yield monitor was not performing correctly, the combine operator was maybe playing with the hydrostat too much, where the numbers on the yield monitor were spiking. We could remove those. We cannot correct those, but we can remove those. But the problem is if we have gaps in the data that we've removed, as a big data analyst, I would be tempted to simply omit the entire field from the system rather than trying to correct it. So the point is, data quality is going to be very important moving forward, especially if people want to participate in big data systems. So what's the future of ag data? Well, I put future in quotes because some of these things may be more today than the future. For instance, one of my predictions is that when ag data are truly big and our big data system is truly operational in agriculture, the secondary uses will be recognized as valuable. Remember when we used the Amazon example and the example of the G/E/M with yield monitor data? The secondary uses of ag data will be viewed as valuable, more valuable than the primary uses of that data. And one of the questions I will throw out with farms is that, if your yield monitor ceases to work today during harvest, do you A, stop the harvester to get the yield monitor operational again, or B, keep on harvesting? And I get different responses. A few weeks ago, I asked this question, and a gentleman stood up, and I'm going to paraphrase and soften his statement. He said, "Ain't no way that anyone will ever stop a combine to get the yield monitor working again." And two other gentlemen in the same audience stood up and said, "We've been doing this for a few years. We may not delay corn harvest into December, but we will try to get the yield monitor operational again because we do see value in this data and what it can do for us." So the prediction here is that combine operators will be trained to not only harvest grain, but also collect data. And that being said, one of the things that we're finding from a research and a practical standpoint is that harvesting dynamics, playing with the hydrostat, but also direction of travel throughout the field. Each field could be different. But the direction of travel through a field impacts the value of data or the quality of that data. Future connectivity is the next infrastructure. We think about infrastructure as being, rivers and roads of moving inputs to the farms and grain and other outputs to their point of sale. Wireless connectivity is going to be an infrastructure, I call it in the future, but it's already becoming one today, not only in the United States, but globally. Before we go on, I wanted to give some acknowledgments. This presentation was built with a lot of help from different people, in particular Alex Shanahan here at Kansas State University. I'm on the road with Dr. Shannon Farrell from Oklahoma State University quite a bit, who will co-present the next presentation in this webinar series. Give them a shout out for all the help that they've given me. My contact information, I've already shared my Twitter handle, Space Plowboy. But here's my email address as well. And this is the QR code that I promised for the CCAs who are looking to get continuing education. You can scan that. I scanned it on my laptop yesterday, and it seemed to be working on my CCA app. And that kind of concludes the overview of big data in agriculture for this first in the series of Big Data webinar that Ashley Elkson and Shannon Farrell will pick up the next in this series. So Ashley, if you're ready, I think we may have time for a question or two.
Yep. If anyone has questions, you can type those in. And in the meantime, you were talking about poor wireless internet connectivity in rural areas. What can people in those rural areas do if they want to utilize the data they collect?
Oh yeah, so one of my biggest fears, I'm not on wireless right now, but my internet connectivity or my internet connection on my wired line isn't real stable even here. And it's going to be a big deal. And when we're thinking about moving data, it's not just we're actually trying to move data, sometimes pretty big data files in a wireless manner. So actually, we have a really good question, looks like, from Liza Casper.
Yep, I see that now. Let's see here. Can you please explain secondary uses of data such as regional compliance, and who finds the secondary use most useful, the farmer or the company?
So I'll address the second part of that question first. And who's going to benefit, the farmer or the company? And the answer is both can, but theory is that the aggregator, whether it's a third-party company, a group of farmers, or the aggregator, who's ever in control of the flow of data, they will enjoy the majority of that value. Okay, so the value to the aggregator will actually be greater than the summation of all the value received at the individual's level. This is just a characteristic of a network. So the aggregator will enjoy the majority of that value. Secondary uses of data, such as regional compliance. So think of it this way. Each individual they're collecting data for a certain purpose, maybe for documenting yields or on-farm experiments. But how can that be used in the aggregate? Well, one way that could be used for societal benefit is if there are problems with certain events, then we can actually get into better insight into how, if agriculture is or is not impacting, let's say, the environment. Looking at any given farm's data set, we would not be able to determine that. But looking at them all together at the same time in the collective, we would be able to have insights that would be
You there,
And we
Terry?
have a question from, yes, I'm here. Did you lose
Okay.
me?
I did. I'm not sure if everyone did, but I thought I lost you there at the end.
I've got a question here. Can I put the results from my big data post-processing on my balance sheet if it has value? That's a really good question. I've been seeing that debated not only in agriculture but other industries. Today, the value of data does not have a place on a balance sheet from financial theory or from the financial industry. That is being debated. Now, other intangible things like trademarks and copyrights and patents, goodwill, they all have a place on the balance sheet. But today, data does not. But the interesting thing about that question is that leads us down a path of who has the ability to claim that value, which kind of forces us into that question of who owns that data, which is a really good springboard for your and Shannon's presentation next month. I don't see any more questions listed. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. All right. Thank you, Terry. And if anyone wants to go ahead and fill out, there's an evaluation for today's webinar at the bottom right-hand side under links for webinar. And you can also visit our Maryland Risk Management Education blog for further discussion on topics related to big data. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors today. College of Agriculture and Natural Resources at University of Maryland, the University of Maryland Agriculture Law Education Initiative, Kansas State University Department of Agricultural Economics, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and Oklahoma State Agricultural Economics. And again, check back in with our upcoming webinars and check us out on the umaglaw.org website for future events. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.